Hello everyone and welcome to The Public Space for this very awaited episode. We were supposed to do it yesterday, but there was a lockdown where Piero is located apparently, so he had to take extreme measures, but he's with us today. How are you doing, Piero?
Hi, I'm fine. Happy to be with you again.
All right, so you are the author of many survivalist books and the latest CBRN, Surviving Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Event, plus the coronavirus. What a badass cover. That's the most badass book cover I've ever seen.
Yes, we actually hoard the cover to use the current crisis as a sales thing, but the book is actually out in French in 2016, and I co-wrote it. Just to say that I'm not, I didn't become a scientist in a few years. I didn't become a specialist in nuclear, radiological, plus a chemist, plus a biologist and a virologist in a few years and a few days. I actually co-wrote this book with a specialist who happened to be the head of the JAJN, which is the elite anti-terrorist group of the Gendarmerie Nationale in France, and who himself is actually a chemist, and of course trained on these problems. And so we wrote the book a few years back as a complement to my other survivalist books, which used to be on how you survive an economic collapse or how you survive a problem if you're locked down in a city. And all these books are actually going to be reprinted because they're all out of print because of these current event and other events. And this one indeed is just out in English.
Wonderful. So they're like toilet paper, very desired these days. Now, the coronavirus seems to have caused the current situation, but is it a case where the coronavirus is such a new thing and a grave event? Or is it that there was a bubble looking to pop? I tend toward the second hypothesis. I tend to think that the economy essentially was due for a crash, and it's just the coronavirus that has synchronized everything.
Well, what is interesting is that every time there is an event, you have to see what is the event per se going to cause in terms of problems or mortality directly. And then you have to see the indirect consequences of such an event. In the case of a pandemic, everyone knows, and except those in power in the last 3 months, obviously, that a pandemic, you first of all need to understand how dangerous it is in terms of contagion and in terms of mortality, how fast it and how much it spreads to people, and then how much it kills or incapacitates people, obviously, for how long. This is the first data. The second element is how much indirect consequences this causes to the health system and the cure system of any society it touches, for how fast and how long. And then the third element is what are the economic and social consequences of such an epidemic. And one could also add something we touch in our books as well, is the long-term cultural consequences, because epidemics have shaped societies very profoundly over history, whether it was the Black Plague or older epidemics. These are elements, and of course, as Native Americans figured out, a pandemic or whether it is bacteriological or viral, eventually can actually do a lot of harm for population who are not immune. Now, if we take this current situation, what you have is, first of all, this pandemic that starts somewhere, well, this virus that we are not yet 100% sure how it started, where it comes from, but certainly we start to have the first sign in November. I detected it myself early January, where I started to have some news coming from China. And I presume I'm not the most aware person in the world in terms of virology, because you have doctors who do that as a job. So in January, you started to have problems, early January problems in China. And eventually mid-January, they started to lock down some cities. And when we look at the data, first of all, the data from China, is it accurate? Do we have precise information? Are they lowering the number of deaths because they don't want to feel like they're a poor country? They want to say, no, we manage the situation. It's not that bad. Because sometimes when you have events like that, some poor countries, actually, they inflate the numbers. Sometimes you have a hurricane that touches, I don't know, Honduras or Salvador, and then they say, oh, we have 200,000 homeless families. And you look at the data and they say, but in that region, there is no 200,000 families, because they want to get aid, they want to get money aid. In this case, I think it was the opposite. They played down the numbers, but eventually, when you have dead, it's very hard to play down the dead. You can play down the people infected, but the dead. So it ended up that you had maybe 200 people infected and 50 people dead. And that probably must have said to a lot of people, including me, say, holy shit, what is happening? Because this is a lot. And of course, you have to think that this is the number of dead now compared to the number of infected now. But you have to compare this with the number of infected 2 weeks ago, or how long it was. We didn't know at the time how long was the incubation period. So you say, well, 2 weeks ago, maybe you had 50 people infected, and now you have 50 people dead. So you're like, holy shit, what is happening? So of course you think, okay, they must lie on the numbers. But on paper, this is fucking dangerous. Now, of course, we know that the number of people infected, and we actually know from the experience in Italy, is in fact much, much higher than the official numbers, probably by a factor of at least 10. So we have, first of all, we had the World Health Organization, who in January, end of January, and early February said, yes, it's very dangerous and preoccupying, but there's no need to shut down flights and borders. So, of course, it's going to spread. What are they thinking? They think that people don't take a plane when they have fever and they're ill. So this thing spread out immediately all over the world. And this is a time where I started to do a lot of course, I do videos on my channels, but also I started to really lock down all my preparations, because I've been preparing for similar things for 15 years.
Yes.
So I started to pull the alarms.
That's what I was wondering. There must not have been much in your life to change, right? Because you've been on this forever.
No, I actually went to buy bananas and oranges. That's the only thing
yeah, the fresh stuff.
Yeah. And in February we had ski holidays with the children, and around the holidays were from the 18th of February to the 20th, and the 20th was the last day of the holidays, and that was the day I think we had the first case in Switzerland. So that's only what, 3 weeks ago. Now the country is in lockdown, if you think about it, and so. That's 3 weeks ago. I said to my wife and children, and I have 4 children. I said, you're going to have prolonged holiday. You stay in the house, and I will go in the city and do whatever I need to do. And I'll take the risk, because by then my assessment of the illness was that, yes, it is more dangerous than the flu. Yes, so it kills more and it spreads about the same, perhaps faster. But the consequences are going to be high for the following sectors. First of all, the hospital sector. And this now, when I was saying this in end of January, beginning of February, I was one of the few who was saying this because I wrote about it in the book. Now, of course, everyone is saying the same. And you have doctors who said in February, oh, don't worry, this is nothing. Now they're saying, oh, yes, it's very dangerous. Everyone has to stay home and so on. So you have a specialists who are starting to change. So it shows that the media, they just don't know anything. So it's another example of the miscommunication and I think incompetence. I actually do not believe this is maybe I'm wrong, but I do not believe this is a a plot or a conspiracy or anything organized, because the only incompetence is so commonly spread across all countries in the world. So
yeah, and one of the ways in which we can see this incompetence is about a week or two ago, the big tendency of media to ask about testing. It's like, why are we not doing the testing? Testing, I don't know, as far as your exploration of pandemias go, as far as I can tell, would serve no purpose at this point.
Well, you could have tested people coming out of every single plane coming out from China. But then, of course, what if someone flies from China to Singapore or China to Moscow and then from there to your country? It doesn't. So it's too late. This is the definition of pandemic, is that eventually you have people infected in every country that spread it from there. It's not just people coming from a place. It shows that modern communication makes it way too fast for any decision to be taken. And the problem, of course, which is a true problem, is that it does very quickly overwhelm the capacity of hospitals to cure whoever has symptoms. And indeed, the absurdity of global testing is that you should test 100% of the population every day, which is completely infeasible, to have accurate numbers. And then you could say maybe, oh, after all, this is indeed not worse than the flu. But you cannot do that. So you only test people who have a probability that is high or who have already early symptoms. It's funny because I started to cough this morning.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, ha, maybe I got it. But then I have no fever and I feel fine. So maybe I don't. It's just a cough. So the paranoia starts to come to everyone. But certainly the hospital element is true. Is that you do overwhelm hospitals if you treat everyone, and if as is common in the world today, you try to save everyone. Believe me, in Africa they don't think this way. They will not try to save everyone. But again, that's my wife says to me, you think this way because this is why you're not a doctor. But doctors try to save everyone. And so,
yeah,
of course,
we saw testimony from Italy, and the doctors under high pressure on the hospital, now they have to make ethical choices. Like they chose recently to stop caring for 80 years old or more, or people who they felt like even if they were to save them, that they would die earlier, they would die eventually. So they are clearly faced with a dilemma because of restricted resources. But there's no way we could have had the artificial respirators for the entire population. It's just not possible.
Of course, it is impossible. But also the problem is that, well, I think as a biologist, I think you know this pretty well, is that when people start to overwork themselves, I'm talking about doctors and nurses, and they lack sleep, as happens with this kind of emergencies, well, eventually your immune system goes into a drop. So you are stressed, and you're also in contact with a lot of virus sources. And because viruses do mutate slightly, also, we have to tell to people, when they talk about mutation, people think of science fiction. They imagine that this is becoming some sort of uber virus that can mutate into some weird supernatural shit. It just mutates a little bit. And of course, in some cases, you can be infected by 2 strains, but the effect is going to be similar. And the effect and the way your body and your immune system fights those viruses, it is similar. So it's not that you have suddenly a pulmonary virus, and then the next day this has mutated into Ebola that kills your liver. This doesn't happen this way. But it's true that these doctors who are tired, they get super infected, and some of them will die from exhaustion plus the virus. So you have this situation where, indeed, if you had said, well, you know what, if you're 60 years old and older, fuck off, to make it simple, well, then you do not overwhelm the hospital system at all. because they say that the vast majority of people who have these problems are older people and people who have already immune deficiency problems and people who have especially weak, in this case, respiratory problems. So, for example, people, and of course you should add obesity and you should have heavy smokers. Of course, the factors pile up, but people who are very healthy, they should not indeed, in reality, they should not be very worried. And this is something I said before. But you cannot, you see, the problem is when you communicate, you say, well, in theory, yes, it is fairly dangerous. In statistics, we don't have the data yet. And the more we advance, the more we have current data, the more reassuring it is, but also the more the panic has spread. And finally, you cannot say to the people, look, the old people, the boomers are going to die. I mean, some of them are going to die, maybe 10%, maybe 15%. But after all, it's not such a big deal because you're not productive elements of society anyway. Let's be very cynical and brutal here. But politically, you have to take decisions, too little decision and too late, because if you do them too soon and too strong, and this leads me to the third element, and which is killing the economy. But if you do them too late or too little, you do spread the illness, and then you have to take the measures of confinement, which are killing the economy. So I think the politicians started to enter into this, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And some have reacted very fast and very strong, like in Italy, I must say that, and China, of course, before. And some have acted very late, such as France and USA. And on top of that, you have some specific individuals in some organization who actually completely lied about the situation and took very, very psychologically harmful decisions, such as in France. As soon as the illness started, they sent huge batches of these little masks, which are useful for the hospital system. And they sent them to China and to Iran and to other countries. And of course, very soon they had none left for their own country, which is, these masks do protect the workers in the hospitals. But, there's no need for, and I only wore it once, and that was yesterday when I had to do my very, very last buy before I left to join the family in the house. And I had this thing, and then I said, Piero, you're fucking stupid. You're not going to catch. Well, and even if you do catch it, first of all, you could have catch it 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, and then you're shopping in the place where I was walking in the street, and there's not many people, and there is enough distance. And again, this is a virus. It's not some super powerful thing that flies in the air and goes to people and bites them. My mother was telling me, because she's in her house, and she was telling me, can I go and do, she lives in the countryside, can I go around and walk in the countryside? And I say, of course you can. I mean, this thing is not in the air waiting to attack you. This is not a werewolf. This is just a small virus. It's okay.
Yes. I agree with you that the more data we get, the more it looks like closer to the flu. Eventually, perhaps in a year from now, we'll look back and see a death rate of maybe 1% or lower, because the 3.7 seems like an overestimation based on lack of knowledge. We don't know exactly how many people are just handling the virus at home, and that is one of the critical numbers we should have knowledge of. As a reminder to our crowd, join me on Entropy. It is my favorite platform if you have questions for me or Piero tonight. And the survey tonight is, do you agree with the federal government handing out young bucks? Because one of the big news today is that the White House is currently considering the possibility of sending checks to Americans. We're talking about perhaps in the form of a income tax reduction, but they are also studying the possibility of just sending out checks or cash to people. What do you think about this reaction to the economic crash?
Well, first of all, I think that we're very lucky that we're in a situation where we still have a lot of energy going around, which may not happen next time, in the sense that we can still have, if we want, trucks delivering food. We can still have, a postal office. I mean, of all things, I mean, sending checks. This is like 19th century. But anyway, you can still have that kind of system to still function. I'm not sure that in the next few years, when the next pandemic, similar, but there's no need to be to go for very harder things. I'm not sure the economic system will last. And indeed, the problem with such a virus is that once you put in the mind of the people, whether it's true or not, but once psychologically you know that you're going to have, maybe 40, 50%, which is the normal way that these things work, of the population who are hit with the virus, eventually this is how the virus dies out. I mean, once you reach enough people in society, then you cannot spread it anymore. And these people, whether they developed an immune response that is effective or they die. And usually the death rate, I immediately thought that this is a kind of a 1% death rate. I mean, probably it would be less, but then if you add the problem that I just described and the problem that I will describe now, which is the economic shutdown, probably you will reach 1% in most probabilities. And 1%, it's about less than what the human population grows in 1 year. So the long-term effect of this on a purely medical and statistical way is zero. Now, there will be consequences on other fields, which I'm sure we'll talk about, especially Absolutely. The cultural effects.
So we're looking at the economic effects, and of course the Dow Jones has crashed. So the big narrative of Trump making the economy go better than it ever was has fallen. And we're also talking about a major reduction of consumption. We just went on the street, me and Mama JF. There's just less people in cars. There's less people at the grocery store. Sometimes there are these crazy panic buy spree, but then the stores are left empty. People are staying home, and that means a lot less action for restaurants, for bars, for anything, perhaps except the survival essentials.
And indeed, the particular element here is that you have basically the engine of production in the world, which is China, which has suddenly shut down, and it will remain. It has shut down or actually 2 months ago, and is only starting now to restart slowly, and it will restart. I mean, there's no question. And on the other hand, you have the other engine, which is the consumption engine of the world, which is now shut down. And it will be shut down for 2 months. Because don't believe when the government says we shut down for 1 month. 1 month is 2 cycles of the virus contamination of spread. So basically, if everyone stays home, you have a family with 5 people, and one of these guys has the virus. It will spread it to the other 5 at least, because you're at home. So then the 5 people will have it, but then they will not spread it across. So you have to wait for the first guy to have the illness, so that it takes maybe maximum 20 days. And then the second group of people in the house must also have it, which adds another 20 days. And then to be sure, you add another 20 days. So that's 60 days. So that's 2 months. So you can be guaranteed that this shutdown lasts until 15th of May minimum. Maybe end of May for the countries who are late. And it will be later for countries who are not yet started, like Latin America or Africa. However, they don't really count in terms of economics. But US and Europe shutting down now for 2 months means, 2 months is 1/6 of the GDP of the year. So you have basically, a 10% drop of the GDP over a year. Perhaps you can, perhaps a little bit less because the food is still being worked out and so on. But you basically have what I described in my first book, an economic collapse. Okay, most probably it will be short. It will be not a definitive economic collapse. It will be something that lasts 2-3 months. And still there is food in some markets. So if people are not violent, if people don't get crazy, and indeed if they get some money to spend, because this is another problem is, I hate to say to be socialist, but in this particular situation, first of all, let's remind something, and as our friend Molyneux would say, if there were no governments, this would not have happened. It's true.
I'm going to talk to Molyneux in 3 days from now, so a good imitation.
Well, say hi to him. Okay. But also the other element is that if we have a government, if we have such an evil as a big government that does crazy stuff, then that government has to pay for all the rents and all the people who are not going to have income, especially the small businesses. Otherwise, this economic collapse becomes permanent. And that will kill vastly more people than any virus. Mm-hmm. Then we enter 2-digit numbers, because that means civil war, that means desperation, that means the army in the streets shooting people. This is something, no government actually wants, and I know already we will have people saying, oh, it's a conspiracy, they actually want that, and so on and so on. Okay, I don't know, but I'm just telling you the mechanics. The mechanics is that if a government doesn't help the people in such a scenario, then you have a real collapse. And because it's a virus and because it's a collapse, believe me, the rich people, they don't want this to happen. The rich people don't want pandemics, and the rich people don't want economic collapse. They make a lot of money out of a functioning system. The politicians are only having a job because we have a functioning economic system. Otherwise, they have no jobs. The whole people in power, they absolutely need this system to work. So you could say that maybe some of these crazy rich people have ideologies that want to kill people and want to reduce population. Okay, I don't dispute that. This is possible. But if they do that, it's kind of also a self-suicide in a partial way, at least. So maybe, okay. So I don't want to exclude these potential conspiracies, but still it doesn't help us on what we should do. Because, if someone wants to kill you, there's no point trying to make an investigation on why and so on. First, you must protect yourself from that and make sure that you can fight back eventually.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the proper preparation steps. And we have a lot of questions from the crowd. Your philosophy has been, last time you came to the show, and I think it makes total sense in the current situation, has been on sustainability, rather than physical protection, rather than having the top mask at $500, or having a respirator system and a yellow suit. You're saying be prepared to survive for a long time on your own.
Yes, and if you are prepared on what I explained in my first book is that you need to be ready for seven of the fundamental elements that makes you autonomous and self-sufficient in life, which is autonomy in water, autonomy in food, autonomy in health, autonomy in energy, knowledge, and then defense, and then of course the social links with the people around you, including starting with your family and friends, and then with your neighbors and so on. And this is how you create an ecosystem in which you can be as much as you can self-sufficient. And of course, what you can't do yourself, because you cannot do everything, of course, you eventually buy. And for example, you grow your vegetable, but maybe it doesn't cover 100% of your needs. So yes, you do have, as they say in America, a deep larder, a place where you put your cans of food and your peaches and your canned vegetables and so on and so on. Of course, you could do that. You learn to defend yourself by having a good network of people around you. But yes, of course, you have a gun, and I can tell you, in my house and in the village, everyone is carrying a gun right now. It's
oh yes,
it's beautiful.
So
to
it's
see.
not as bad as we would think from an American perspective. We tend to think there's not much gun rights in Europe.
Well, they're being reduced, but first of all, we will not obey the law. And the second of all, there's still pretty good gun rights around in Europe and certainly in Switzerland. So everyone here in the village is ready. We are all very friendly with each other and everything. But I don't want to be the guy who thinks. First of all, the army is patrolling everywhere, so it's okay. We're not having. I think the risk of problems in Switzerland is actually zero in that field. I'm not so sure in France, but for sure it has been zero in Italy, and it's been zero in Switzerland. And again, I think this crisis is not going to last very long. So sometimes people say, where can I find your book to prepare for this virus? And I say, well, you know what? It's too late for this one. It's too late. It's what you should have done. You should have done 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago. But now you are stuck at home, and you hope that the supermarkets keep being supplied, and I think they will.
Yes.
And you have time to read my book to prepare for the next one, because there's going to be a next one. And this is the way biology works. And we are 8 billion people in the world, in big cities, with probably morons who do not respect the rules in P4 laboratories, who have spread such virus out. And this will happen again because human error, and I think it's going to be, if we will find out it's a human error eventually. Human error does happen. You know, Chernobyl is a structural error on which you add a human error. Fukushima is a structural error. You know, building a nuclear power plant next to the shore in a country that has invented the term tsunami. Very smart. Then you have the tsunamis, and then you have a natural event, and oops, you have a catastrophe. You have chemical power plants in every city, and eventually there is an accident or a sabotage or a terrorist attack, and then you have something like Bhopal, or you have something that is a small scale, but if you live next to that chemical plant that burns, you could be dead. So prepare with the things with the attitudes, with the skills, and yes, with the tools. For example, in a pandemic, most people, we don't need a $500 mask and a hazmat suit. I actually have a few at home, not in the countryside where I live, but in the Geneva ones where I'm near, because there are a few chemical plants in Geneva. But this is because it's my job to test these things as well. But if I didn't have the money, and if it wasn't my job, I would not have such a suit. But I would still have a little radiation counter, and I would have, of course, a few masks and a few, these gels, which are indeed hygienic protections in case of such a pandemic, but not to wear at home every day. I mean, I guess some people, they imagine they need 400 gallons of this hydroalcoholic gel and so on. Be reasonable. Use it when you, and of course, yes, you self-contain. If there is an epidemic, you don't go out licking the handles of the doors and so on. You have basic hygiene. But so my books are fantastic to help you prepare for the next problem. But today's problem, it's too late. I'm not a good sales guy for my books, but buy now for the next problem. But the problem that you have now it's too late. You're stuck with what you have. As they say, yo-yo, you're on your own.
Dion Cunning on the regular chat says, it's not too late. There's still things you can do. Certainly you can go buy a couple of cans right now and to survive a little longer on your own. But the philosophy that Piero is pushing is really holistic. It means changing how you know to do things. Do you know how to grow vegetables? Would you be able to grow vegetables if you don't have access to a store providing you with the seeds and with the material? That is more why it's important to be prepared in advance. Now, as far as the governmental response to this, a coronavirus patient refused to quarantine, so deputies are surrounding his house to force him to. Is there some authoritative authoritarianism that is being swept under the rug here, that is being pushed with the coronavirus? Are they testing how much they can invade on our rights?
I don't think from looking at the way they are acting, I don't think this is planned, and I don't think they are very organized to clamp down on people more than they would. However, they will learn from this, and indeed, the response of the people, if people are scared and at home and saying, "Oh, please, please, government, help us, what should we do without you?" Then they will say, maybe these people are really easy to tax and easy to put more and more laws to control them, because the temptation is there and it's a long trend already. Now, if people are saying, well, thank you, government, but we don't actually need you, and we will self-quarantine, of course, we understand. We have to play this game. But, the police, you don't need to come here because I have enough guns and organization, and I have a militia with the friends here, and we don't need you. Thank you. Then they will say, well, look, maybe we have to be careful. Now, as we write in this book, in CBRN, we explain that there are fundamental cultural shifts that happen from epidemics, fundamental changes in society. For example, I argue that the reason religion stopped being important in the Western world is because of the Black Plague of the 14th century. Because people prayed to God every day in a very deep level for everything they were doing in what we call the Dark Ages, which were not really dark, but certainly they were darker than the antiquity. The Roman Empire was much more organized and functioning. But then people prayed God all the time for everything. Should I go left or right? Should I do this business? Should I? This was so important in everyday life. And suddenly you have an illness that kills 50% of the people. Now, this is the mother of all killers. 50% of the people, and you have people from the time who write down. I found this note, and we explain this in the book, where you have this merchant in Florence who says, "Well, today I just buried my wife and 3 of my kids today." And of course, the people had no idea that there were germs, and they had no idea that the plague was actually because of a flea. It was the parasite, the bacteria was brought by the flea who was riding in rats. So they thought this was a punishment from God, basically. And so they prayed, and you have babies dying, because this is the illness that touches everyone. So you had babies dying, children, and people who were super, religious, and they were doing everything according to the law of the church. And suddenly these people die, and the priests who go from one dead to another die even more. And so suddenly you say, well, maybe this religion is a bit bullshit. And slowly you start to detach from it. And at the same time, because you have less population, people become richer because they inherit the lands, because that's where the wealth is the land. Suddenly you have lands and shops from the people who died. And suddenly you're not a slave anymore of your count or earl and something. You're an important peasant because you have a lot of land, and you can produce more. So basically, you want more rights. You want more recognition of the importance of what you do economically. And so suddenly you start to view people as individuals who are important, and not just a soul that that needs to pray and obey. So suddenly you have the what is going to become the Protestant ethic that derives from that a century and a half later, and then you have Europe ruling the world for 4 centuries. And I think the fundamental shift was the Black Plague, the triggering element.
That is a fascinating hypothesis. I had never heard of it. But yeah, there is certainly, in fact, we already see in our societies the impacts of the coronavirus on family life, on public schools as an obligation. I've never heard in my life of public schools saying we're shutting down for 2 or 3 months. And this would be the first time it happens since I'm alive. This is quite impressive, and it will recenter people around their family and around what's important. In that sense, the output of this virus, the changes to our society, will likely be extremely positive. Amazon to stop accepting all products other than medical supplies and household staples to its warehouses amid coronavirus crisis. It essentially sent a memo to its sellers, the people who are selling on Amazon, and they need to deliver their stuff to Amazon. Amazon will not take them anymore unless it's necessary stuff or medical stuff. So it's quite a bizarre take there, because Amazon, in this world where we don't go out anymore, it would have been a good solution. So why is this shutting down? I'm not sure. But they are shutting down any arrival of stock to handle the increased demand.
I don't know, but the reaction to such an event, you must I have to say something that is going to excuse a lot of the bad decisions that have taken place in the last 2 months, is that epidemics and illnesses in general is something deeply rooted in our psychology. Because, if they say there is a lion in the street, or if they say there is a werewolf in the street, okay, you organize, you take your pitchforks and your gun and whatever, and you hunt the fucker. But this one is small, is microscopic, it's everywhere, and it becomes this supernatural foe that can kill you from the inside. And this is not something that humans can rationally, foresee. I mean, we understand it on a conscious and rational level. We understand what a virus and a bacteria is. I mean, if you're a little bit educated. But on an irrational level, this is an unfair challenge. It's an unfair threat. It's an unfair predator, because you have no fighting chance face to face. You cannot wrestle the bear or hunt the fucking or wolf. This is
it's
something
in the
that
air.
It's there, and so it's a very visceral threat, which is much bigger than the statistical reality. And so maybe you have business decisions which are completely moronic, and we will study them in business school 10 years from now as, the example of the stupid Amazon decision of 2020, how Amazon killed itself. I don't know. Maybe it's impossible to know. But in business schools, when I did some business school many years ago, I remember learning some decisions of company which actually, of course, with hindsight, made absolutely no sense. But at the time, sounded like a great idea. Like, hey, let's invade Poland, and things like that. Sometimes you think you're going to do something smart, and it ends up very bad for you. So it's fascinating. I'm actually, this is a very, for me as an author and as a studying of history, and at the same time a survivalist. I don't say this with any glute but it's a fascinating time. I'm ecstatic in the learning of and analyzing things that happen, and many I don't have the answer. This one is certainly one I don't have the recul. I don't have the perspective enough to see. Yeah.
So someone on the regular chat says they say the decision is temporary and it's for until April 5. I will say anyone who tells you temporary right now is just telling you the next date at which they will update you about the temporary measure. Would you agree with this?
Well, income tax was temporary.
Free Speech says 3 most important prep items for COVID-19 specific threat other than toilet paper, mask, Purell, and food.
Now, the toilet paper thing is also one of those psychological things, is that people are thinking literally, oh shit, what if there's no more toilet paper? Because it's one of those things we're so used to have. And then we remember that, hey, you know what? There is something invented like that is called a shower. If you don't have a toilet paper, or even a bowl of water with some reusable towel. Anyway, so it's a very specific crisis thing that happens. But I think that if you still have time to go to shop and things like that, you have to think the following: in the northern hemisphere, we're in spring. And spring, usually something happens that people in the city don't realize is actually you actually plant the crops for the summer. So if you happen to have some balcony with some earth and or if you're in the countryside with some lawn and land and so on, you know what? If it's still open, go to the garden center nearby and buy whatever seeds you can get. Now, some people will say, oh, you must buy the biological heirloom seeds. You don't have time. Just buy whatever you can. Buy some potatoes, buy some cabbage, and plant the fucking thing in the garden. And if you know some, farmers in your community, remind them that you actually want to buy their crop in the summer, and that they should plant the stuff. Because what is going to happen now in Spain and in Italy, and I'm sure in some states in America that produce a lot of the food for the rest of the country, is that you have the workers who start to be ill, and they shut down the places where they live, and so you don't have the workers to plow the fields. So you still have the truck, the big automated machines, and you have a lot of these big machines. But I hope the government also gives handouts to the farmers to actually plant corn, wheat, and everything we will need to harvest in June, July, August, and September, because then we have a real problem.
Yeah, I would say I have my own suggestions of bizarre stuff other than the usual. Perhaps a book. A book is a good idea. Stay cognitively exercised. If you're going to be isolated, keep your brain active with some knowledge. Personally, I would take like a lot of paper and pen, and I would do some prime number mathematics if I had the luck of being enclosed for a year in my house. Perhaps horse manure. If you have farmers around you and they have these piles of horse manure, you say, I'm going to get the manure and I'm going to have some energy for my crops. Other than this, perhaps medical stuff. Perhaps you want an ECG to monitor your heart rate, or if one member of your family has certain disorders. I mean, there are cheap solutions out there. And if you know that you're not going to want to ride to the hospital, perhaps have a little bit of self-monitoring devices. Those are ideas out there. Thomas Howard sends a super chat. He says, 1 century ago, we had a worldwide pandemic, followed by worldwide economic depression, followed by world war. The rhyming of history seems poised to reoccur only on an accelerated timeline. Would you agree with this analysis?
Yeah, although, of course, the what was called the Spanish flu actually followed also a big war. And we still don't understand the mechanics, because we have very little clinical data, whether, probably people were stressed and weak. And that flu maybe coincidentally was also a bit stronger than usual. But it did kill a lot of people. It did kill a big percentage. I think it was 3% of the people at the time. So it's if that was today, it would be pretty a much bigger scale than what we have now. The there's a few things that I bought recently on top of everything that I already have, but mostly the skills that I have was that I bought a machine that concentrates oxygen for breathing. Nice. That's the only thing that I thought that this was quite peculiar and useful for this kind of illness, because if it's a respiratory illness, eventually you have fibrosis of your lungs and you have pneumonia, and breathing concentrated oxygen can help you if you have a problem and you cannot be in the hospital. And it's not a cheap machine. It's about $300, but it's not super expensive either. So that was my investment in.
Does it pump it into a kind of compressed cylinder, or?
It's I haven't started using yet, but it ends up in your nose, with those things you put in the nose to help you breathe. So it probably pumps. It probably concentrates oxygen with a small engine, and pushes out some of the air. So it's basically a filter, a chemical filter, probably. So I need to. I am actually setting it up tomorrow. This is just to make sure I know how it works. But yeah, otherwise, if you're not in lockdown yet, I would say the most important thing is perhaps get to know your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors, be friendly with them, understand who's the batshit crazy guy, who's the nice, helpful guy, who has skills that can be useful for you. You organize, get to learn your family, get to learn your neighbors. And yeah, of course, have a book or two. This is spring, it's going to rain. There's going to be a few days of big rain and you don't want to go out anyway. So yeah, have books, read. I'm actually going to organize, I am organizing school for my 4 kids, and there are 4 ages, so 4 types of different curriculum. So I'm basically saying, fuck the curriculum. I'm going to decide what you learn. So I'm following the school to be sure that they don't get bad marks, but they're all pretty good. Your school is way too easy anyway. But I'm making sure they have a history lesson, that they're going to have a physical exercise, like a war-like physical exercise. And so we're going to do kickboxing and war, studying history. I'm enjoying it. It's actually great but then you need discipline, because otherwise they don't, it's they don't know it yet, but they just entered 2 months of army.
Absolutely. And what a great moment to teach your children Euclidean geometry. With compass and straight edge, show them how to construct a 12-sided regular polygon. They will remember this more than anything they've ever learned before they're 18 years old, and it will be fundamental to their thinking. You will be working out their cognition. Personally, I recommend Euclidean geometry from 9 to 12 years old. It's a perfect moment to take the brain when it's ready to get shaped. Free Speech says, I traveled, I felt sick, I got the corona test. CDC and health department denied my test because I didn't have a fever. The doctor said it was insane not to test everyone, but they don't have enough. He said CDC says infected or not, the advice is same, stay home. So you have these people, they succeed at convincing their doctors, but when the test gets there at the CDC says no, not the correct symptoms. Pretty impressive. Yeah.
So it's part of the statistic bias. So in fact, when they say, I don't know, that you have 2,000 infected people in a city, you can multiply this by 10 easily. And this is why when you have 200 dead, you think, my God, 10% dead, 200 out of 2,000. No. It's 200 out of 20,000, maybe 40,000. We will never know. We don't know. And there was the same cases many times. People going to the doctor in late January or early February, saying, I have the symptoms, and the doctor says, have you been in China recently? And the guy says, no, I've not been in China recently. Oh, well, it's just the flu. So okay. Yeah.
Go ahead. Did you have anything to add? Okay. Katie says, Jeff, question for you and your guest. What are your thoughts on the dilemma of high consumerism reliance in megacities in relation to government reliance and non-self-sustained communities? Is there a solution? I mean, this is probably the place where it will hurt most. Those people who are highly dependent in large cities. Their lives relies on the grocery store being functional tomorrow morning.
Yeah, the growing dependence of almost everyone, and especially people that have zero or no or very little revenue and depend for their lives and drugs and everything on the state. And I include in drugs antidepressants, not just the cocaine and crack and meth. There's a lot of people who are completely dependent of the state, and these people will have a big problem now, because on one side they're not certain they will get the money. And even the people who say, well, now I really need to find a job. Well, there's no job right now. There's no way you can find a job. And on the other side, you cannot find everything anymore. And this includes also the higher level classes, because I went to buy oranges and lemons and mangoes and bananas, because I'm not going to have mangoes and bananas in the next, probably not in the next 2 months. And I like mangoes and bananas. What can I say? But so a lot of people will not have their sushi. They will not have their, all the things they're used to. And that's for the people who have money. And the people who don't have money, maybe they don't find tortilla chips and all that crap. So there's going to be a habit crush that is going to happen, which can be psychologically unbalancing for a lot of people. But you're right that the gentleman who asked the question is right. The dependency of the state is going to be shown as a very terrible illness of today's society. And the consumerism habits, which everyone denounces, but everyone has, me included, and survivalists included, who buy a lot of stuff that they never use, and of which I'm guilty as well as anyone else. It's true. I have way too many backpacks and tents, and I have way too many guns and way too many stuff. Maybe we're going to focus on the essentials, because in 2 months, maybe the first 2 weeks will be hard, but then we focus on the essentials. But I can tell you something, is that if you just married with your lovely, young, beautiful wife or girlfriend, being 2 months in an apartment can be quite interesting. If you start with your 20-year-old wife, I mean 20, not 20-year-old, but maybe 50-year-old,
20-year-long marriage,
exactly, wife, which you only see 10 minutes every day after work, and because you're bored, and you fuck on Sunday morning because you have to. Well, suddenly I can tell you there's a lot of marriages who are going to explode during these 2 months, because suddenly you have to be with someone all day long. And I'm saying this as a man, of course, and I'm not going, it's no one I know, but the same for the wife, who, is quite happy that her husband is a workaholic, that is never home, and then suddenly he's at home every day. So it's going to be quite explosive in some cases, but at least that is the fun part. I mean, it's the comical part of the crisis. There's going to be movies in the next 50 years about this.
Absolutely. Frank De Silva says, Piero, do you support generally that men or groups of 10 or less organize and consistently prepare and maintain contact for such emergencies? I believe that you've said essentially, yes, you have to be in contact with your neighbor, you have to have a network, and ultimately what you're going to lack in a crisis will be very different from what your neighbor will lack. So there are places to exchange here and to make everyone happy.
Yeah, it's funny because, as I said, all my neighbors in my village, in my mountain village, we all talk to each other. One guy has a lot of chickens, and my chickens have been eaten by the wolf, by the fox. Sorry, last year. Oh, so yeah. I don't have chickens right now. So he's gonna give me chickens, and I'm gonna have him some of my land for his cows to pasture, and. But we do all this without touching hands. It's funny. So we just, there's a time, as I joke with everyone, to say this is the time to rehabilitate the Roman salute as very hygienic. But of course, this is very tongue in cheek, considering
Yes,
the people
it's been a meme out there on the social media. And finally, Base Devolver says, practically speaking, is it really important to provide testing for a disease that has no cure? My answer to this is no, unless you are in a 100% isolation strategy, which we could have started in the beginning of January, maybe, but it's too late now.
Yeah, if you tested, if you stop the flights, or if you tested 100% of if you put into quarantine everyone that flies in or everyone who enters the country, yeah, in theory you can do such a thing. But we have ideology of open commerce and open borders for trade and travel and so on, which I actually like in many ways, because I like to be able to go to China on a whim and back and so on. But they were saying that, closing borders will not stop the illness. And once the illness starts to come in, they say, it's too late to shut the borders. So now they shut the Schengen borders. So basically, European borders are shut, just like America did a few days back. But, for what? I mean, once you have infected people inside, it's not the migrants, which we should keep out anyways, but it's not them who are going to bring more cases. I mean, and then actually, I think they don't want to come right now. This is a trap. so they will not come. At least not now. I mean, they're not stupid.
And have you looked at the UK strategy of developing resistance? What do you think about it? There's someone asking about the UK strategy, which appears to be to accept the virus.
Well, this is the one that makes because you can burn the virus. You can allow it to burn very quickly through the population in about 2 months, or you can allow it to burn slowly in about 3 or 4 months. The question is still the same: is what are you shutting down, and what are you overwhelming? If you burn it through the population, you will overwhelm the hospital system very fast. If you do it slowly, in theory, you don't overwhelm it as much, but in reality, they put containment after the hospital system is almost breaking already. So in the end, basically, the British are going to say, well, look, if we have to go through this, let's do it fast, let's suffer. And I presume they will have rules on who they treat and who they don't, because if they try to treat everyone in the hospital system, they're going to explode it anyway. But there's no good solution on a pure. This is a pure political decision, and the accountability will come later. And actually, I'm for once not a guy that says it's time to blame decisions and people. I'm just saying, well, look, we have to play along, because there's no point to prove. What can you prove? You go to the street and say, hey, I'm not scared. Well, you're alone. So what? You want to organize a music concert for 20,000 people? They will arrest you. So there's nothing you can do on this thing right now. You just have to play along, stay put, stay home, and read the book to get ready for the next one, which might not be a virus. It may be, it could be a war. It could be an economic collapse because of the debt that is going to be created in the next 3 months, that is piling up on the huge debt that already exists. It can be the oil capacity that is collapsing right now, the capacity to produce oil. And then when economy starts 6 months from now and will resume to be on normal level maybe a year from now, then you don't have oil anymore. The supply will not catch the demand anymore, so the oil prices go up. So we have entered quite some time ago a phase where we will have bigger and bigger economic collapses and economic recoveries. And one time it's a difficult to plan event like a virus. One time it's going to be the oil. One time it's going to be a war. One time, and actually this is the wobbling of the economic system that I think is going to collapse soon anyway. And by soon I mean anywhere in this decade. And so you still have time to buy the books and read them, by the way. But it's certainly as an economic system that is eventually going to collapse, because let's face it, we're way too many. And it's not me to say how we should reduce, but what I'm telling you is there is in the ecological system of the world, if you think of it as an ecosystem, eventually when you overshoot with the population and you consume too much resources, unless you have a game changer technology and you have an upscale quality improve of the people, and you know this topic very well, either you have the change inside who the people are genetically, or eventually the system regulates and you have a scale back and you have whatever catastrophe that brings everything down. And in this case, the city people, they cannot survive, because if the shops, imagine today the shops shutting down because there is no supply at all, then people massively die. This is not a 1%. This is going, if this happened, it's a 90% die off. We're not at this situation, but eventually in the next 10 years, I think we have a very strong probability to be in that situation, unless there is a game changer event, which we don't foresee. And maybe this event is maybe people out of this virus will say, maybe I move to the countryside, maybe I stop being, there's a consciousness that develops. But everyone I explain this tells me, you're still too naive, you're still a dreamer. People will not change. 6 months from now, people will go back to eating at McDonald's and watching Netflix all day long. So it's going to have to be collapsed at some other point later.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it will happen later. I don't think this is the biggest event we will be faced by in the next few decades. I think there is much more to come, but this gives us a taste of what fails in our society, what fails first in this situation. Now, it will be left to the imagination how worse it can be, but if you don't want to trust your own imagination, buy CBRN. What a wonderful book, what a wonderful cover, and so relevant right now. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear event. Piero Giorgio is the greatest thinker in survivalism, and he's been thinking about these questions before it was fashionable. So get his book. And Piero, thank you so much for coming. I have to move to a solo part of the show because I have a little announcement to do concerning my vacation. But it was great to have you, and it's great to see that you're doing good and that you are just falling back on a plan that you had already laid out, and you seem to have everything out there in the countryside to be sustainable for a long time.
Ciao, take care.
Bye-bye, Piero. Thank you so much for coming. What an amazing guy Piero is. Very nice of him to come. Unfortunately, yesterday he couldn't because Switzerland has announced lockdowns, major lockdown measures. And so since Piero has his countryside set up with the whole you can see it on his YouTube channel if you want to go see it. It's amazing. The links to his stuff are in the description below, both book and YouTube channels. And you can see he has a whole house made of logs, a little bit like this. That's the side of his wall almost. And so, and this house is equipped with solar energy. He has a lot of stuff in there that he shows on his YouTube channel. And on the other end, since he is a niche celeb of some kind, he is also in Geneva. And so he has a more downtown location. So he had to move from the downtown to the countryside. And that is why he couldn't make it yesterday. What is and isn't allowed during a shelter-in-place order. So shelter-in-place orders are beginning in various parts of America. I believe that this article is about San Francisco, where there are 7 regions right now, 7 different counties where there are some of these orders. The basics of a shelter-in-place order during the coronavirus pandemic are fairly clear: stay at home. But as cities, states, and federal government take increasingly aggressive moves to stop the spread of the novel coronavirus, the precise details of a shelter-in-place order and its many exceptions for essential activities may soon become familiar to millions of Americans across the country. Already nearly 7 million people living in a wide swath of northern California are under a shelter in place. So 7 million people in the US right now under a shelter in place. What that means is you can get out essentially only for life-saving reasons or supplies of food or essential material to survive. Tuesday, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio urged New Yorkers to prepare for the possibility that there could be a shelter-in-place order within the next 2 days in New York. So if you are in New York, I mean, I don't know how you stayed in New York all that time. I'm in New York 10 minutes and I want to get out. But if you are still in New York, keep in mind that there could be changes in your civil rights and in your ability to move within the next 2 days. Whether that actually happens remains unclear, though. Governor Andrew Cuomo, whose approval would be required for such a move, has repeatedly downplayed such a move. All right, so that is the situation. Let's see what people have voted. Do you agree with the federal government handing out young bucks? Wow, you guys, even in a state of pandemia, you guys are not falling for the socialism. That's quite impressive. Even I am, and even Piero was like, you know, there are some situations in which injections of money are necessary. The problem is that our system relies on a kind of cycle of continuous functioning. The fact of not having a job 5 years ago is not the same thing as not having a job today. Not having a job today doesn't mean that you don't participate to a productive aspect of society. It just means that you've been fired because everyone is panicking and everyone doesn't know if they're going to sell in a month from now. That's why me and Mama JF, we went to the grocery store and things are starting to be empty. More than just paper towel. There were lots of stuff that are starting to be empty. And I'm like, what causes this? Well, it's probably that everyone in the chain of supply doesn't know. Is it worth for me to be holding stock when I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to sell this stock? Philip L. says, Jeff, the U.S. government could easily have used that money to pay for people to do work such as delivery of supply or farm work. Yes, the money that we're sending down the Fed and everything, the money that is printed that way, clearly it's a system that has built in the system is the premise that rich corporations must get richer, and that people shouldn't be the point of injection of money. I really like, from that perspective, although I don't like the idea of UBI fundamentally, if you're going to tell me that there's two options to inject a certain amount of money, either through the corporations or through the people, through a UBI, then I'm totally in for the UBI. If it's about giving out that money, let's give it to the people. They will, through their choice, they will redirect this money to whatever is worth to the society, because they're going to be buying meat because meat is good for society. They're going to be buying necessary services A, B, C, D because it is good for them and for society. So the problem is when you distribute that money from the top, you end up with an economy that serves the top. Frank L. de Silva was asking a question about actions. I will not read your question just because it's at the border of rules, and I don't want to violate the rules in these circumstances. I want to be sure that we maintain presence on YouTube. Sheen Lantern says, Jeff, what was the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? The weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I mean, I've been through some shit, but the weirdest? I don't know if there's really that much weird stuff in my life. There is lots of important stuff, there is lots of, but weird. I mean, my entire life is weird. The way I just drove to the US, and I drove a lot in my life. I drove a lot in my car. But I don't think I would characterize the events in my life as weird, but my life overall is weird. The way I dropped a university career and I said, fuck it, whatever it is that's needed to survive, I don't want to do the university circus anymore. That may be the weird event in my life, whereas the regular path for me would have been to just continue and seek for a job and beg until I'm so cocked that essentially I can't produce anything good in this world. Skaty says, Jeff, as a hard geneticist, wouldn't you support the portion of the herd that is unprepared the thing is, you are asking questions. I'm going to delete your chat there because you're asking questions. We cannot wish harm on this channel. We cannot do that kind of stuff. And you cannot try philosophical experiments where you're like, what if the virus hits this person or this other person? So I can't do this. Toy Insanity says, Jeff, talk about the time you met Dawkins. Oh yeah, that was a weird thing. When I flew to go chat with Richard Dawkins, and he showed up at the restaurant, and he was with his cell phone, and he started filming a dog. And I was like, okay, he's acting kind of autistic. He's shaking our hands, smiling, and he's like, oh, hi, who are you? What are you doing with your science stuff? He was asking, about each of the people who were there. But very quickly, Richard Dawkins pulled a cell phone without my consent, and he started filming. I'm just saying without my consent, like, it's kind of a Me Too, it's a Me Too story from the perspective of JF, So he pulled his cell phone against my consent and turned it toward a little dog, a little cute dog, the kind of dog you see in California held by women of millionaires. You know how they're all sexy and they have their little their big boobs, and they're just walking around town in California, and they have these sunglasses, and they have this little dog, like Yorkshire type or Pomeranian. I don't remember exactly the species of the dog. But she was with the little dog. He was laying at her feet, and she had, her beautiful legs, and she had a short dress, and Richard Dawkins was like, look, a dog. And he was like going full ethological autist, like, and I was like, this is my role. I'm the autistic biologist. But there I was faced with the mirror of myself. Richard Dawkins, not giving a shit, filming the dog, as the dog was just beside the legs of the woman. And I was like, is he filming the legs of the woman? Because that's what I would film. No, he's filming the dog. And he was like, look at the behavior of the dog. And I was like, okay, we are in a totally concrete, layered city in the center where life cannot even survive if it's not human. But Dawkins is succeeding at doing ethology right here. And Jay Gould says he was using the dog as an excuse to film the woman, right? No, I mean, that's what I would have done. But I think that Richard Dawkins was generally filming the dog. And he asked the woman, so there was consent. He said, is it okay if I film this dog? And he was focusing on the dog. That was weird. I don't think that, anyways, I don't think that Richard Dawkins is a pervert. In the current Me Too context, there's even, you could say, something very weird about Richard Dawkins, which is that there's very few, that there's not accusations out there the way we see against Lawrence Krauss. Like, dude, are you even fucking woman? Because you have zero sexual allegations against you. What the fuck is happening here? Sean Peer sends a super chat through Entropy. Thank you so much. He says, JF, will the coronavirus lead us into anarcho-capitalism utopia? Oh my god. You wish, but no, I mean, listen, I don't think it will be that major of an event. Never forget something. The people who benefit from the functioning of this society are extremely powerful, and they don't disappear just because of a little coronavirus economic crisis. Everything that's been done up to now is essentially advantaging these people into this cycle of self-reinforcement, which leads them to accumulate more and more wealth all the time. There is very little chance that a minor event such as the coronavirus, I mean, everything taken into consideration, it's minor comparing it to the bubonic plague. There is no reason why these people who are already have accumulated a certain amount of power will not come back to claim it and come back to continue benefiting from it. So, no, very unlikely. I would love if you were correct, but I don't think it will happen. Now, we will significantly, probably have a hit on the treasury of the state. And I'm very interested in what it will lead to, because the state is running on a assumption that the incoming taxes keep growing no matter what. Now you have immigration cutouts, you have income lowering, you have people getting fired, and you have less consumption and therefore less taxes, less sales tax. Now this will be a big hit for the state, and the ever-growing programs of the state will have to retract. And I would love to see it happen, very importantly. Now, there's this girl, Lunatic, on the regular chat. She's been like, heart 100, baby, muscle. She's using emojis. I think I'm going to call her a bot. Lunatic, you are a bot. If you do not provide me with strong evidence that you are a human, I will be banning you within the next 30 seconds. Lunatic, I believe that I've spotted you as a bot. Alright guys, so that will be it for tonight. I was supposed to go on a vacation for 3 days. I've decided to come back because I had promised a show with Piero, and he couldn't show up yesterday, so I wanted to live by my promise here to you guys. That being said, I will still be going on vacation for the next 2 days. I have some interesting stuff coming up. Adrian Bai, who is a journalist who has exposed certain aspects of the coronavirus, particularly asking why so few deaths in South Korea and so many deaths in Italy. He seems to have the answer to this question. In fact, his reporting on the subject has been now covered in CNN, and so he's been trying to understand why such a variation in the death rate. My early answer to this was maybe it's because of the age in Italy. I think he has a different hypothesis. He's going to join us on Saturday. Also, Rachel, who is in charge of Entropy, she's telling me that she would like to hear about the new Trudeau law, Bill C-8, which seems to be making it illegal for parents to disagree with transsexual conditions, the transgenderization of their children. It would make it a criminal offense, leading you to jail if you just want to try to guide your child toward living as his biological sex. Like, if your child is a boy and you say, boy, you should be a boy, that would be 5 years of jail in Canada. I may talk about it solo, but I think we could have Rachel also come on the show because she made up such a great platform in Entropy. As of now, Entropy represents a significant proportion of my income. Many of you are using it as the platform for super chats, as I've asked, and at this point, it's like 1/3 maybe of my income in the form of super chat. So it would be great to have her and discuss what are the projects ahead, because in the end, they seem to be determined that offering a free of censorship, a platform for creators, and it's very needed in these dark ages where YouTube tells us that AI will ban our videos without human review. Floppy says, hello JF, I'm a real person who enjoys metabolizing organic chemicals and excreting fluids just like you. Yes, human beings. Scott says, JF, Dr. Dutton said it's because they are not evolved to deal with disease due to their hot, dry climate. It's a hypothesis. We'll see. I think that the journalist who's coming on Saturday, his hypothesis is based around the response of the health system and the response of the government. So we'll have a talk with him. But I'm going on vacation for the next 2 days because I saw that a lot of people were talking about this in the regular chat at the beginning of the show. It's one thing to have the public space, but a lot of you want to see my next book. And so I have to finish my next book, and there's no other way to make it really a top book. I need to withdraw, and I need to put myself in a totally different mood. I need not to be scrolling on Twitter all day looking for the next news item or what I could say tonight. I need a deeper approach, and that means withdrawing from the internet. A form of self-quarantine, if you will. Skaty says, someone donate some money to JF to sing Queen, Don't Stop Me Now, quick. Well, you would have about 1 minute to do it, but perhaps it's better we wait another day for singing this song. Sheen Lantern says, JF, does YouTube take a cut of the money when someone becomes a JFG member? Oh, absolutely they do. It's certainly not the best way if you want from a rate perspective. The best way if you want to send me money is PayPal, Subscribestar, New Project 2, Patreon to some extent, but YouTube is taking a portion of this money. Alright, T. Torchon says, having a good time. Alright everyone, sleep well, and I'm happy about, I was looking at my record on what I've covered of the coronavirus, and what I've said in January has come out to be true. I said, if you want to go for a strategy of full isolation, you have to do it now. What are the countries that have done this? What are the countries that have listened to this extreme proposition of mine, which was not, I was not saying you should do it. I was saying if you want to totally keep the virus out of your country, you need a total shutdown now in January. And the only country that seems to have done this is Russia, as far as I can see. And Russia has a very little amount of cases. Russia is currently at, I believe they are at 114. So, yes, if you wanted to fight this virus that way, if you wanted to go the other way, then you should not be making moral displays about how you're fighting the virus. You're not. T. Torchon says, JF keeps 100% of cryptocurrency donations. All addresses are in the description. Yeah, cryptocurrency is definitely a nice way to send me money, but it's not everyone who has this. Running Wild says, a break from the screens will help your eyes. Certainly it will, but my eyes are doing good. You know what I've been reading about today because I was more relaxed? I was heading into my vacation mode. I've been reading about mushrooms. I would very much like to start a mushroom culture. It seems I have the kind of brain for that kind of stuff, and sterile working and everything, cleaning stuff is something that I've been trained at when I was a surgeon anyway. I would love to have right here in the studio maybe, because it's a room that I only use for the YouTube, so why wouldn't I have a column of mushroom being cultivated right here? I don't see why. We're losing time, we're losing productivity, as long as this space in front of me behind my monitors is empty. So I've been reading a lot about how could I get started on a mushroom culture, maybe oysters, maybe even morels. This would all be very fascinating. All right, everyone, much love and sleep well. I'll be back on Friday for the Molyneux debate.